Ambassador Liam Donovan stood at the precipice of the towering crystalline chamber, gazing out at the stars through the transparent alloy windows. The Zorgak's Grand Assembly Hall was an architectural marvel, a testament to the Empire's millennia of expansion and conquest across the galaxy. Yet, for all its grandeur, Liam couldn't shake the feeling of unease that hung in the air like a toxic mist. He turned as he heard approaching footsteps behind him, the click of claws against the polished stone floor. Liam steeled himself, straightening his posture and squaring his shoulders. The figure that emerged from the shadows was draped in an ornate crimson robe trimmed with gold filigree, his reptilian features angular and severe. "Ambassador Donovan," the Zorgax hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "I trust you are finding your accommodations suitable." Liam forced a diplomatic smile. "Quite suitable, Vice-Chancellor Xaxus. The Zorgax hospitality is unparalleled." It was a lie, of course. The Zorgax idea of hospitality was a far cry from what any human would consider welcoming. But this was the dance of diplomacy, a careful choreography of pleasantries and platitudes masking the simmering tensions beneath the surface. "I'm pleased you think so," Xaxus said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I know these negotiations have been challenging for your species." Liam bit back a scathing retort. Challenging was an understatement. The peace treaty between the humans and the Zorgax had been a tenuous one from the start, a fragile accord born out of necessity rather than genuine goodwill. For decades, the Zorgax had viewed humanity as little more than upstart primates, a young race to be subjugated or exterminated as they saw fit. It was only the threat of humanity's advanced weaponry and the potential for mutually assured destruction that had brought the Zorgax to the negotiating table. "Peace is always a challenge," Liam said carefully. "But it is a challenge we must rise to meet, for the sake of both our peoples." Xaxus made a non-committal noise, his yellow eyes narrowing. "Indeed. Though I wonder if your people truly grasped the magnitude of that challenge." Before Liam could respond, a chime sounded from the communication device on his wrist. He glanced down, his brow furrowing as he read the urgent message scrolling across the screen. His heart seized in his chest, a cold dread gripping his spine. "Ambassador," Xaxus questioned, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. Liam looked up, his face ashen. "There's been an attack," he said hoarsely. "A human medical research outpost on the edge of Zorgax space. Dozens killed." Xaxus tilted his head, his expression inscrutable. "A tragedy, to be sure. But what does this have to do with our negotiations?" Liam's jaw clenched, his diplomatic veneer cracking. The survivors reported seeing Zorgax warships fleeing the scene. A heavy silence hung between them, the weight of the accusation palpable. Xaxus' eyes glittered dangerously. "A bold claim, Ambassador," he said softly. "One that could carry grave consequences if proven false." Liam met the Vice-Chancellor's gaze unflinchingly. "And one that could carry even graver consequences if proven true." The fragile peace between their species hung by a thread, and with each passing moment, Liam could feel that thread fraying further. The attack on the research outpost was a declaration of war, a gauntlet thrown down at humanity's feet. The Zorgax had crossed a line, and there would be no going back. As he stood there, facing down the inscrutable Vice-Chancellor, Liam knew that the future of both their races hung in the balance. The choices they made in the coming days would determine the fate of billions and shape the course of the galaxy for generations to come. And deep in his bones, Liam knew that humanity would not back down. They have fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let the Zorgax trample them underfoot. If the Zorgax wanted a war, then a war they would have. And this time, humanity would show them the true cost of defiance. News of the attack on the human medical outpost spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The images of the destroyed facility, the bodies of the researchers strewn among the rubble, were seared into the collective consciousness of humanity. Anger and grief surged through every human colony, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to drown out any voice of reason. Liam Donovan found himself at the center of the maelstrom, desperately trying to keep the fragile peace from shattering completely. In the days following the attack, he shuttled back and forth between human and Zorgax space, meeting with leaders on both sides in an effort to prevent all-out war. The Zorgax deny any involvement in the attack, Liam said wearily, rubbing his eyes as he addressed the Human Council. They claim it was the work of rogue elements within their military, acting without authorization. Rogue elements. Admiral Norisuto scoffed, her holographic image flickering with barely contained rage. You really believe that, Ambassador? The Zorgax have been looking for an excuse to wipe us out for years. This is just the opening salvo. Liam sighed, the weight of his responsibility bearing down on him like a physical burden. I'm not saying I believe them, Admiral, but we have to consider all possibilities. Starting a war based on assumptions and emotions will only lead to more bloodshed. And how many more of our people have to die before we take action? Sato demanded. We have the strength, the technology to take the fight to the Zorgax. We should strike now, while we have the advantage, and risk escalating this conflict beyond our control. Liam countered. We have to think about the long-term consequences, Admiral. A war with the Zorgax could devastate both our civilizations. The debate raged on for hours, with no clear resolution in sight. Liam could feel the tension mounting, the pressure building like a volcano ready to erupt. He knew that time was running out, that every moment of inaction brought them closer to the brink of war. It was then that a message arrived, a secret communique intercepted by human intelligence operatives deep within Zorgax space. The contents of the message were chilling, a detailed plan for a massive invasion of human territory. The Zorgax were mobilizing their forces, preparing for a strike that would cripple humanity's defenses and leave them vulnerable to total annihilation. Liam stared at the glowing screen, his blood running cold as he read the words. The attack on the medical outpost had been a diversion, a way to draw humanity's attention away from the real threat. The Zorgax had never intended to honor the peace treaty, had never seen humanity as anything more than a target to be eliminated. The ambassador closed his eyes, the magnitude of the situation crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had dedicated his life to the pursuit of peace, to the belief that diplomacy and understanding could bridge even the widest of divides. But now, faced with the incontrovertible proof of the Zorgax's treachery, he knew that the time for talk was over. Humanity would have to fight, would have to stand together against the coming storm. They would have to unleash the full might of their advanced technology, their unbreakable spirit, to turn back the tide of Zorgax aggression. Liam's hand clenched into a fist, his resolve hardening into an unbreakable diamond. He would not let his people fall, would not let the Zorgax extinguish the light of human civilization. He would do whatever it took to protect his people, to ensure that humanity would not just survive, but thrive in the face of this existential threat. The lines had been drawn, the die had been cast. The Zorgax had made their move, and now it was humanity's turn to respond. And respond they would, with all the fury and determination of a species pushed to the brink. For in the end, the Zorgax would learn the true meaning of human resilience, the unbreakable spirit that had carried them to the stars and beyond. They would learn that when pushed to the edge, Humanity would not just push back, but push forward into a future of their own making. Liam took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he prepared to deliver the news to the council. The road ahead would be long and hard, filled with sacrifice and sorrow. But he knew that humanity would rise to the challenge, would beat back the darkness and emerge stronger for it. For that was the human way, the indomitable will that had propelled them to the pinnacle of the galaxy. And it was that will that would see them through this crisis, no matter the cost. The Zorgax invasion came like a thunderbolt from a clear sky, a sudden and devastating assault that caught humanity off guard despite Liam's warnings. Zorgax warships, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian, tore through human defenses like tissue paper, leaving a trail of destruction and death in their wake. Liam watched in horror as the reports flooded in, each one more grim than the last. Colony after colony fell to the Zorgax onslaught, their populations slaughtered or enslaved, their infrastructure reduced to rubble. The once mighty human fleet, the pride of the species, was decimated in a matter of hours, its ships outmatched and outgunned by the superior Zorgax technology. It was a nightmare scenario, a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Liam felt the weight of every life lost, every world destroyed, pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He had failed, had let his people down when they needed him most. But even in the darkest hour, as the Zorgax closed in on the heart of human space, Liam refused to give in to despair. He gathered what remained of humanity's leaders, the battered and bloodied remnants of a once proud civilization, and laid out a desperate plan. "We have one chance," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "One chance to turn the tide of this war. We have to unleash our hidden weapon, the one we've kept in reserve for just this moment." The others looked at him with a mixture of hope and trepidation, their faces lined with the strain of the past few days. They had all heard the rumors, the whispers of a secret project deep within the bowels of human space. A project so dangerous, so potentially devastating, that it had been kept hidden even from humanity's closest allies. "You're talking about the Omega Protocol," Admiral Sato said, her voice tight with tension. "The doomsday device." Liam nodded grimly. "I am. It's our only hope now. We have to show the Zorgax that we're not just going to roll over and die. That we're willing to do whatever it takes to protect our people." There was a moment of heavy silence as the weight of the decision settled over the room. To unleash the Omega Protocol was to cross a line, to step into a darkness from which there might be no return. But in the face of annihilation, what choice did they have? "Do it," Sato said finally, her eyes hard with determination. "Send the signal. Let the Zorgax know that they've awakened a sleeping giant." Liam felt a surge of pride and fear as he input the codes, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed. The Omega Protocol was a gamble, a last-ditch effort to even the odds against a foe that outmatched them in every way. But it was a gamble they had to take, for the sake of their species and all the generations yet to come. The signal went out, a pulse of energy that rippled across the stars like a stone dropped into a still pond. For a moment there was silence, an eerie calm that seemed to stretch on forever. And then the sky erupted in a blaze of light, a searing burst of energy that lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. The Zorgax ships, caught in the blast radius, crumpled like tin cans, their shields overloaded and their hulls buckling under the immense pressure. Liam watched in awe as the tide of battle turned, as human ships, armed with technology the Zorgax had never seen before, tore through the enemy ranks like avenging angels. The Omega Protocol had worked, had given humanity the edge they needed to fight back against their oppressors. But even as the Zorgax retreated, their forces in disarray, Liam knew that the war was far from over. The Zorgax would not take this defeat lightly, would not rest until humanity was wiped from the face of the galaxy. He steeled himself for the battles to come, for the long and bloody road ahead. But he also felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness. Humanity had shown that they would not go quietly into the night, that they would fight to the last breath for their right to exist. And as he stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the stars wheel overhead, Liam made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, would lead his people to victory no matter the cost. For he was human, and the human spirit could never be broken. The line had been crossed, and there could be no turning back. The Zorgax had sought to exterminate humanity, to erase them from the annals of history. But they had underestimated the depth of human courage, the unbreakable will that had carried them to the stars and beyond. And now, with the Omega Protocol as their sword and shield, humanity would show the Zorgax the true meaning of defiance. They would fight, and they would win, for the sake of all the generations yet to come. In the weeks following the activation of the Omega Protocol, the war between humanity and the Zorgax took on a new shape. The once unstoppable Zorgax advance faltered, their ships and soldiers suddenly vulnerable to the advanced human weaponry that had been unleashed upon them. Liam Donovan found himself at the forefront of this new phase of the conflict, leading strike teams deep into enemy territory to sabotage Zorgax supply lines and gather vital intelligence. The work was dangerous, each mission a calculated risk that could end in capture or death. But Liam and his team pushed forward, driven by a fierce determination to turn the tide of the war. As they struck at the Zorgax from the shadows, the main human fleet regrouped and rearmed, incorporating the Omega Protocol technology into their ships and weapons. The results were staggering. The once outmatched human vessels, now more than a match for their Zorgax counterparts. The battles that followed were brutal, desperate affairs, each side throwing everything they had into the fray. Human and Zorgax ships clashed in the void of space, their weapons flaring like miniature suns as they tore at each other's hulls. On the ground, human soldiers and Zorgax warriors fought hand to hand, their blood mingling on the scorched earth of a dozen worlds. But slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. The Zorgax, so confident in their superiority, found themselves pushed back, their conquered territories slipping from their grasp one by one. The human forces, bolstered by their new technology and the indomitable human spirit, pressed their advantage, retaking lost colonies and establishing new footholds deep within Zorgax space. Liam watched with a mixture of pride and exhaustion as his people clawed their way back from the brink of annihilation. The cost had been high, the sacrifices immeasurable. But humanity had shown that they would not be broken, would not be beaten down by the oppressive heel of Zorgax tyranny. And yet, even as victory seemed within reach, Liam knew that the Zorgax would not go down without a fight. They were a proud species, a warrior race that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. They would not accept defeat at the hands of a lesser species, would not surrender their dreams of conquest and glory. As the war ground on, Liam began to formulate a plan, a daring gambit that could end the conflict once and for all. It was a plan that would require every ounce of human courage and ingenuity, a plan that would take them to the very heart of the Zorgax Empire. The target was Zorgax Prime, the seat of the Empire's power, and the home of the Zorgax Emperor himself. If they could capture the planet, if they could force the Emperor to surrender, the war would be over. The Zorgax would have no choice but to acknowledge humanity's right to exist, to respect their place among the stars. It was a risky move, a gamble that could end in disaster if it failed. But Liam knew that it was a risk they had to take, for the sake of all the lives that had been lost and all the lives that were yet to be lived. As the human fleet gathered at the edge of Zorgex space, Liam stood on the bridge of his ship, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. He thought of all the people who had fought and died to bring them to this moment, all the sacrifices that had been made in the name of freedom and justice. And he knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that humanity would not fail. They had come too far, had endured too much, to be turned back now. They would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. For the future of their species, for the future of the galaxy, they would fight. And they would win. The Battle of Zorgax Prime was a turning point in the war, a decisive victory that shattered the Zorgax hold on the galaxy. Liam and his team led the charge, storming the Imperial Palace and capturing the Emperor himself, forcing his surrender after a brutal battle that left the once grand halls of power in ruins. It was a moment of triumph, a vindication of all the sacrifices and struggles that had come before. But it was also a moment of uncertainty, a moment of reckoning for a galaxy that had been dominated by Zorgax rule for so long. In the aftermath of the battle, as the Zorgax forces laid down their arms and the human fleet took control of the planet, Liam found himself at the center of a new kind of struggle. The old order had been overthrown, but what would take its place? How could humanity ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated, that the cycle of oppression and violence was finally broken? The answer, Liam knew, lay in the principles that had guided humanity through its darkest hours. The principles of cooperation, of mutual respect, of the fundamental dignity and worth of every sentient being. These were the values that had sustained them through the long years of war, the values that had given them the strength to fight and the courage to hope. And so, as the dust settled and the galaxy began to rebuild, Liam set to work. He reached out to the other species that had been oppressed by the Zorgax, forging new alliances and partnerships based on shared values and common goals. He worked to establish a new galactic order, one that would ensure the rights and freedoms of all its members, regardless of species or origin. It was a daunting task, a challenge that would require all of Liam's diplomatic skills and all of humanity's collective wisdom. But he knew that they could not fail, that the future of the galaxy depended on their success. And so, step by step, world by world, humanity began to build a new future. They shared their technology and their knowledge, their art and their culture, with all who were willing to learn and to grow. They forged bonds of friendship and understanding with species that had once been their bitter enemies, finding common ground in their shared hopes and dreams. And as the galaxy healed and prospered, as new wonders and new discoveries lit up the stars, Liam knew that they had achieved something greater than mere victory. They had achieved a new balance, a new way of being that would endure long after the scars of war had faded. For this was the true legacy of humanity, the gift that they had given to the galaxy. Not just their strength and their courage, but their compassion and their wisdom, their unshakable belief in the power of unity, in the strength that comes from diversity and cooperation. And as Liam looked out at the stars, at the endless expanse of the galaxy that was now theirs to explore and to cherish, he felt a sense of hope and wonder that transcended words. For he knew that this was only the beginning, that the story of humanity was still being written, page by page and chapter by chapter. And with each new day, each new discovery, each new friendship forged and frontier crossed, that story would grow and evolve, becoming something greater and more beautiful than any of them could have ever imagined. For this was the destiny of humanity, the role that they had been born to play. To be the guardians of the galaxy, the champions of peace and progress, the beacons of hope and light in a universe that had known far too much darkness. And as long as they held true to that destiny, as long as they remembered the lessons of the past, and the promise of the future, nothing would be beyond their reach. For they were human, and the stars were theirs to explore, now and forevermore.